Welcome to On My Couch. My co-host Sue and I wanted to create an opportunity to have conversations with super smart people about topics that were really interesting to us and that we wanted to learn more about. So we created On My Couch, and the idea is we have a conversation. So we've been joined today by Diana, and I'll introduce Diana in a minute. But really the intent is have a conversation about a particular topic, learn some new stuff that we might be able to apply in our work environment, or maybe even our personal environment, or maybe just learn something new. So in terms of introductions, my name's Damien. I'm the founder of OMC Group, and what OMC Group does fundamentally is help people work better together. We do that through leadership development and strategy and team effectiveness, but the outcome is really about how do we help people work better together. My co-host is Sue. So Sue, maybe you introduce yourself.
Hi, Damien. Thanks. So my name is Sue. I've had a corporate career for quite a number of years. I've now transitioned to what I believe they call a portfolio career. And I look forward to these discussions because being a lifelong learner and not being in the day-to-day tumble of corporate life, you quite easily become irrelevant. So it's really great to be able to meet people and talk to people about currency and what's happening out in the business world. So very much looking forward to our conversation this morning.
Cool, excellent. Diana, I'll let you add to what I'm about to say here, but really want to say thank you very much for joining us. Diana Bevington, who's the CEO of Bevington Partners, deep experience in process mapping, business improvement, and also change. So again, welcome and thanks for joining us. Super impressive CV. So you're also, in addition to being CEO of Bevington Partners, president of Presbyterian Ladies College Foundation, founder of digitized XEP3 methodology, recently published an academic paper, which is super impressive, Solving the Lean Paradox in the Australian Journal of Management with Professor Danny Samson, and also a guest lecturer at Melbourne Uni. So, curious how you fit all that into your life as well. But today we're going to talk about your expertise, process mapping, business improvement and change, and maybe explore a little bit about how that's evolved through your career and what's changed and what hasn't. But maybe before we get into the topic, Diana, do you want to sort of add to that introduction and maybe a little bit about you, your journey, and how did you get to this point?
Thanks, Damien, and nice to be here with you and Sue. So thanks for the opportunity. I too like to discuss things and learn as well. You probably can tell from my accent, although I pretend I don't have one, that I originally come from the UK.
No.
And you didn't know. And when I graduated, I got offered a job with BP UK, but I decided to come on an adventure to Australia. So I transferred that job. So I made change already to work for BP Australia, where I was a commercial account manager for Western Australia, which was a great learning curve. And it's sort of where I cut my teeth on change and saw some process change. And then I went into consulting to broaden the experience I had across industries, so working in health, manufacturing, financial services, those sorts of things. And they ended up running the consultancy as a 50-person consultancy, and we were able to be very successful by competing with the big international consultancies because we were able to use the toolset XEP3, which enabled us to quickly create capacity within organisations. So that sort of led me working with organisations, and there's been a massive transition, as you guys will have seen, in terms of how consultancies are viewed, how consulting is viewed, and budgets for consulting. And as I've seen this, I've also seen that the skills within organisations have really improved, the capability that internal people have, the qualifications, the research, the reading, all the things that they do. So what I now do is I've taken the XEP3 methodology and software, and I provide that directly at Bevington Partners to organisations so they can improve their processes and create capacity. And they don't have the big ticket consulting bill to go with it, which is obviously the benefit for them, and which means that they can continue to do that. So that's kind of my journey, and that's what I do now.
Cool.
So just in a sort of 60 seconds or less, you used a lot of, I suppose, terminology in that introduction. So That's okay. And I define, if you can define each of what's process mapping, what's business improvement, and what's change. And I get that there's no one definition, but from your perspective, how would you define process mapping, business improvement, and change?
Well, let's start with process mapping. So process mapping, as it's traditionally done in organisations, is understanding what is being done, how it's being done across the organisation visually, and who's doing what. I would have to add, though, typical process mapping is really documenting the happy path from a customer perspective. But the successful thing to be thinking about with process mapping is how you can also pick up the unhappy path, the rework, the chasing, all the problems, because if you know that, you can fix it. So maybe if we go to change is really about thinking about, well, where do we want to go and how are we going to get there? It's a lot about the how, it's less about the what. So if you take process mapping, you need to know what your current state is, but you also need to know where you're going, how are you going to get there. And business improvement is all about performance from an organisation perspective. And depending on the type of organisation, you have different targets or things you're trying to achieve. Obvious ones: revenue, cost, turnaround time, better patient outcomes in health, for example. But then there's the question of how you can be more efficient and how can you be effective. So efficiency is about using your resources in the best way possible and not to waste time doing activities, but also be effective, because you need to be doing the right things. What do your customers actually value? Are you actually achieving your right outcome? Was that longer than 60 seconds? I feel it was. Sorry.
No, I think you had 60 seconds each, so that's fine.
Yeah. Good.
But I suppose just circling back then to the paper that Damien mentioned in his intro, that paper is about lean management. How does lean management then fit in with those, process mapping, business improvement, and change?
Well, lean management is really a methodology and a way of making change. So it provides, if you like, technical structure to making change. An element of it, typically, and again, this is a bit technical, to make is an example, which is define, measure, analyse, improve and control, which is really about measuring the current state, which you can do through process mapping, analysing what the opportunities are, and actually determining what you're going to improve, which is like, what's the new state, where are you going in terms of change, and then using control, which is about measuring that you achieve the change. And change is actually continuous. So the way I would say that change is constant, and you can lift and set your targets to move, but you will need to keep doing that because the environment that you're operating in is also changing.
And so when I'm curious, I mean, we're sort of, in, talking to businesses about things that we do. And I'm just curious about, when you talk to your potential clients about, process improvement, re-engineering, lean, business mapping, etc. I mean, how do you, and I mean, that's an incredibly impressive paper that we've already referenced, right? So, how do you explain it to them? Potentially that a lot of people won't have the depth of expertise that you have. So how do you sort of explain it? And I know you sort of started that process. And then what are some of the questions that they commonly ask, that you commonly, come up against?
Nowadays, I find that organisations already have some idea. They've heard of lean, heard of the Toyota way. They've seen some things. They might have seen some process maps. They might have had some consultants come in and tell them what they should do. Fundamentally, what I find is they're looking for an approach to use, but they're also looking to not spend a lot of money. And in terms of the real kind of stumbling block is they sometimes start from the perspective of, well, we know what we're going to do, so we're just going to go and do it, which, take your hat off to them. That's great. They know what they're going to do. But the reality is that they really need to understand their current state. What is actually happening? What are the problems everyone's facing? Because if you don't know that, then you may end up with more problems than you thought, but also it's so important to bring the people along. So they can have vision, and there's some really great leaders in business at the moment, but it's empowering your people or their people to actually make the changes, and the people doing the work themselves actually know what happens day to day. So if you're the CEO of a bank, you are very unlikely to be able to walk into a branch and start serving customers and using the technology and knowing what the processes are. So if you want to change that, you've really got to ask the people who are doing the work to tell you what they're doing and what are the problems that they face, so that you can make sure that those things are fixed, but also engage them. Because there's that education piece, and I know, Damien, with the work you do in leadership, you've got to bring the people with you on a journey.
Yeah. And it's interesting, and I think I'm just curious, the other piece also is around, sometimes when we do this type of work is about, I imagine one of the other outcomes of, going through and assessing current state before we, move forward into future state is actually making sure everyone has the same view of what our current state is.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's really important that everyone in the organisation who's involved in change actually go through the same process. And we kind of one approach in one part and another approach. And the other thing is because it's fundamental to success, you're going to be looking at some problems in one area of the organisation. So, for example, customers ringing up and complaining that their furniture is wrong and it didn't arrive at the right time and it's broken, but that's being caused by something going on in the warehouse. So you need to know what they're doing, and also the delivery might be not looking after the furniture properly and things like that. So the problems that you find in an organisation, they might start small and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. So there is a real need to have that platform for change.
Yeah. And given your experience, what are some of the myths that you've come across that that you've had to gently dispel? There are either some assumptions that people have made, or some myths, or that you've had to do almost a re-education process.
Well, I think the big thing is there is no silver bullet, which I know is highly disappointing for everyone listening to this. It is about engaging your people, understanding what they're really doing and what the top problems are, because you can't address every problem. But that means that you're going to have to pull a lot of different levers to make the changes. So you can't just say, right, well, we're just going to put in a new system, or we're just going to offshore these things. You can't really do that. And you can do a lot of damage to your organisation if you don't know where you are and you're not sure where you're going, and you haven't worked out how you're going to get there.
Yeah. So that would be one of the myths, that silver bullet. Is there another myth that you sort of come across quite often that you need to sort of gently dispel or educate?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of very smart people who are leaders, and they may, from their previous experience, have, I implemented this organisation and it worked really well, and look what we achieved. But it's about enabling people at work and all levels, because change is very difficult, even if everyone's on board. And the leadership role is really about enabling all leaders to support the change and create that environment, because the more that people are involved and they own the change, the more change you're going to be able to make. The more they think, well, the boss has said we should do it this way, they're going through the motions, they're not owning it. And it's so important, because that will make a real difference between good and great.
Yeah. Cool. Sue? Or you've gone silent, Sue.
Now I'm better. Now I'm back. How do you therefore manage that personal bias, that people have a view, and therefore you go down a path because there's a stronger personality, or how does the process strip it all so that everyone there's equity in terms of the information that you're collecting, in order to be able to go, well, this is the problem that we're trying to solve, and here's the ultimate number of solutions going forward?
Well, that's a good question. The fundamental is we've got to make it as objective as possible. So it's not subjective view. We get in a room, excuse me, and the loudest voice or the most senior person controls what is done. So it's getting that platform, understanding what people are doing, how they're doing it in the same way, and also getting a measure of where they're spending their time. By knowing that, that gives you a total picture, you can then look at, well, what are the problems, and group them together and see what the top priorities are. If you know what those priorities are, you're then solving for the priorities and coming back to the data. So I guess what I'd say is your data of your current and data of where you're going are fundamental to success, as well as what we've already talked about, which is making sure the people are owning this, because otherwise it does become more important, or I've seen this, or we should be doing that. And you really need to have the data behind you. And what we do find, I'd add, and we talked about lean a bit, the term waste is the rework, the chasing, having to fix things, dealing with the consequences of things going wrong. I would actually call that noise. If we don't have that, we don't really know what we're fixing, and we can't actually achieve the results that we're looking for.
So would you say there that defining the scope is the most important part of the project, or if you know, if I was a business person coming to you, what would you need from me in order to be able to partner with my company, for example?
Well, there's probably two ways that you can think about it. So the first way is thinking, where have I got a process that isn't working, that I know? So it could be, I talked about the furniture example. It could be that there are all these errors, delays in production, all sorts of things. You can look at a process that way and look at who's involved in that process and look at what the performance of that process is, which could be turnaround time, could be errors, could be a cost. How much is it costing us to run this process? The other area or way you could think about it is to say, if, for example, you're in the medical industry, you will have very senior, experienced, very highly trained and expensive resources, the doctors, the clinicians, who you want them to focus on the patient outcomes and delivering the best that they can for the patient. But what you'll find is they're also running around fixing things, escalating problems, getting involved in administrative things that they really shouldn't, but they're doing it because they need to get to their outcome. So you can also say, well, what's someone actually doing? What is their role? Where are they spending their time? What do I need to fix to give them more time into that quality, which is coming back to that effective point. How can we make these more senior, experienced, and we spend years and years and years training these people to do these roles, how can we actually get them to use that expertise and not have them running around fixing process problems? So that's the two ways. So a long answer to your question. It depends on the industry. Particularly in health, you see that. But if you were just looking at the sales department, if you've got sales directors, you don't want them doing a lot of admin, but you don't just want to pass off admin to people. You've got to fix it so that the processes are working properly, and then the sales director can spend more time selling. That's thinking of role-based, but the process-based, many organisations already know where some of their pain points are. And they know that, for example, there might be advertising, we can give you a loan in 2 hours, and they know they're not meeting that. So they go, right, well, we've got to fix that. But to fix that, you've got to look at the lending process, not just a little advertisement that they're doing. It's that end-to-end view.
And I'm guessing then, obviously, you might start over here, but actually the issue is what you're saying is really over here, and this is just an outcome of something else altogether.
Exactly. So understanding the driver of the problem. So you've got to know there's a problem. Then you've got to look at, well, what's the driver of it and what's the root cause? So going back to, where is the problem coming from? And it could even be the customer is not providing all the information. Often customers don't, because the form, even electronic form they're filling in, doesn't have all the correct things that they need to fill in. Therefore, someone later is asking them for something which changes the whole process. So you're quite right. And effectively, it's important to accept within change that the noise driver might not be in your control, which goes back to that leadership point. So you've then got to go, well, whose area is it in, and how can we understand what they're doing and add that in so we can then go to the root cause. It will be of benefit to the people in the beginning to get it right as well. because they don't like running around fixing things, chasing things. Nobody likes doing that because it doesn't add any value. Almost makes your job a firefighting job rather than delivering the value that you'd really like to be doing.
And just one final question before I flip over to Damien again. So, as you said, the businesses generally know that they have a problem or there's something that's not working right. There's some rub or creative abrasion or whatever you like to call it, friction. So, why then do they need an external consultant to help them solve that if they already know that they have a problem? So, I suppose from a Bevington XP3 perspective, what do you bring to the table that helps unlock that solution?
We also just need to say, Sue, that sometimes bringing a consultant in can be very helpful. It can be a very, very good idea, right? So just,
Sorry, Damien, I forgot you're a consultant too.
Correct.
Damien, we all agree you're an excellent consultant. But what I'm going to say to you, Sue, is I'm not a consultant now. So I used to be a consultant, but effectively what our organisation does is we bring the tool set, which is a lean method that's digitised, that enables an organisation to capture all roles and processes, what they're actually doing, keep it within the tool, analyse within the tool, and then work out the scenario model, the future, engage the staff for ideas, and then measure that the change is happening. So what we bring is the tool set, but then we also train the organisation to be able to use the tool set. So there'll be practitioners, internal practitioners, so think of them as almost internal consultants to their organisation. So we train them to do that. And we've made a lot of developments into the tool set to enable them to find that easier. And the reporting and the dashboards will support the executive to see that the change is happening, but also those same dashboards, the measurement of the change will be published for the staff. All the people doing the actual work will be able to see that as well. So what I would say is we're effectively bringing the know-how, how to do it within the tool set and letting them carry on doing it. So our success is that we license it to them and they keep making change themselves within their organisation.
Cool. And then, I mean, I think we're all, pretty experienced. We know that, and I think you've mentioned this right from the start, Diana, that, sometimes change fails, not because of the idea or the quality of the initiative, but actually because of the, the people piece, which you've sort of mentioned, a couple of times. I can still remember, I think it was in the mid-90s, Aon did a study that, that mergers and acquisitions, the share price of the new entity actually decreased post-merger, not because the business didn't fit, because of the people piece. So, I mean, from your perspective, in terms of critical, what's critical to success. I mean, you've mentioned things like, leadership. You've mentioned things like being objective and getting people involved. What about, from, maybe if I just throw a couple of phrases at you, but what about a mindset perspective? What's the mindset of the people involved in this type of in the ideal mindset of people involved in this type of work, do you think?
Well, I think I'd say a can-do mindset is really important. But I feel generally it's kind of creating an environment that it's okay to tell everyone that something's not working. And if you have a high level of waste or noise in your role, that does not mean that you're a bad person, you're performing badly. What it means is you're just fixing, troubleshooting and doing these things for the organisation. So it's got to be okay to tell people that there are these problems. And then it's also okay to come up with ideas. You won't implement every solution, but a lot of the ideas that staff have make a massive difference and can really lift performance because they've been thinking about it, but they didn't think anybody was very interested. And I think the other piece is making sure you can demonstrate change is actually happening. And if you like, that's almost internal marketing. Obviously, companies spend a lot of money on advertising externally, building their brand, but internally, if you're making change, you want to show that you're achieving the results. So that's measuring through behaviour change indicators I mentioned before, and promoting that so people, because there will be this cynicism And, you know, it is a little bit, you know, well, they're not going to change anyway. I know we're all doing this program, but they won't change. There is a leadership role there, but there is, you've got to publicise, well, look, we actually did it. Look, it's changing. Oh, and, you know, a medical environment particularly, the doctors have changed. See, look, they have. And that, from that, you can grow your capability for change, because it becomes the way of doing it. And the common language, something like noise, becomes a thing. Oh, well, we've got that. Oh, well, that's noise. Well, we don't really want to do that. What are we going to do to fix it? The mindset shift ultimately comes back to the can do.
Yeah. And then, so what about if we sort of look externally, and we were lucky previously we've had a Jo Clancy, who's a bit of a guru on service design. And one of the things she talked about was that if you can find, from that perspective, if you can find a pain point that a customer has, and it matches up with a pain point that the staff have, that's sort of almost nirvana, right? Because then that's, because that then becomes a really important pain point to solve, or noise in your language. And then, so I'm just curious about going externally to, and you mentioned the great example about sometimes we have noise because our customers don't provide us the right information, not because they don't want to, but because we maybe not ask them. Customer engagement, and then maybe supplier engagement. So how and when do you sort of bring that into the process, the external piece?
Yeah, well, what we see organisations at the moment, they already do quite a lot of surveys to try to understand what the customer says, which is very useful data to have a look at. But they don't tend to ask them too much about the process. And a way to think about it is, if you go and look at a customer service department, they, as you mentioned with that other person, that they are dealing with the problems from the customer, and they are a customer service centre, but I would actually say they're a customer problem solving department. And if you look at why customers are ringing, and sometimes they'll be ringing for less important reasons, but they're actually ringing because something's broken and they can't get through, or there's a problem. And if you look at those, that will tell you where to look within your business, because they're the end of the line. And the way I would explain it is, organisations are structured vertically, but the customer looks at your whole organisation cross-functionally. So, for example, if you ring a telecommunications provider, I won't name any, you explain what you want, and they go, oh, you need to go to another department. I'll just transfer you. And you get there, start again. This is what the customer is seeing. So a good source will also be customer complaints. And it is a good place to start, rather than like contacting all your customers. Is a very big job. To look at what the customers might be impacting. You can also look at the noise drivers that impact the customer. So when you're going back to the customer, why are we going back to the customer? Because a principle of design should be, apart from delivering some very positive service outcome, you shouldn't be ringing the customer over and over again, or emailing them because they didn't do the right thing. You've got to go, well, why, and what can we do to reduce that? A classic example in health is, well, customers will always not turn up to appointments and be late. Well, no, if you text them in advance, they'll probably come in anyway, but they don't know when they're supposed to be coming. And you may not reduce all of it, but you can reduce some of it. So that's how I'd provide there. Suppliers are an interesting one, because obviously they provide a service to the organisation. If you're finding that the noise drivers are indicating that, then it makes perfect sense to then say to extend your view of the process to be including the supplier. And you can also do the same with customers. So you actually understand the full end-to-end. What are they doing? Obviously, that requires very good relationships with your suppliers and customers as well, because you're asking them to say, well, what are you doing at your end? But you can certainly use the drivers as well to negotiate with suppliers in terms of, well, we need to fix this because this is costing us money over here, and make that part of your contract. But the more that you're working together and partnering, as opposed to telling them what they should do, the more you're going to get to the better outcome.
Cool. Great. Sue?
And so what's a case study, a success story that you're really proud of, that you've you've just talked about lots of the moving parts there. So is there one where it sort of you wrapped it all up and you went, wow, that was super successful, and we achieved the ROI, and you know, we thought it was going to be like this, but it might have been something else altogether. So yeah, a bit of a case study summary.
Yeah. Well, the example I give you is the Peter MacCallum Institute, and specifically the CT scan booking process. Effectively, what they had at the time was, in order to get a CT scan booked, it took 29 days, and they were able to get it to same day. The problems going on were out of this world in terms of forms weren't being filled in properly. Doctors didn't complete everything that was right, what was needed. They couldn't get their slots. So what they did was a lot of them were being outsourced to other providers, which was costing the organisation money. And in order to get a booking in, it really came back to seniority, and people were telephoned, chased, people interrupted radiographers and radiologists in order to get a booking in, which is taking them away from the real value. So what was interesting was the XCP3 tool was used to understand what was going on in outpatients who effectively were requesting the service, and what was going on in radiology who were delivering the service. Very important, back to your point, Damien, about your customers, your supplier, and what your actual service is. The top noise drivers, which are quite scary in this day and age, were dealing with fax machines, photocopying, not being able to read a fax, not receiving a fax, also interrupting radiographers while they're actually scanning to deal with bookings. Yes, patients not turning up and not having the right slots. But the most interesting thing to me, having said to you all the way along that people who work in the process can come up with the ideas, got rid of the fax machine, yes, but the way we were able to do that is the staff who did the bookings, they were on the second floor, the outpatients on the ground floor. They said, we'll move to outpatients. Now, by doing that, that meant no faxing, no extra filing, no telephoning. Have you got the fax? Can you read the fax? Or no, we can't read the fax. No photocopying the fax. So that eliminated all of that. That was their idea. And that's a massive change. If it had come from a more senior person, it would have been imposed that they were moving. They came up with that idea. They were also able, therefore, to look at the booking information coming from the doctors and track whether it was right or not. So as part of that, through XCP3, the behaviour change indicators were used to track that, and feedback was given. That we had the chief medical officer actually giving that feedback to make sure that the change occurred. And one little thing I'd just like to say about behaviour change is, in my experience, it is not that people are resisting change, although it might look like it. It's that they're having to do something different, and that takes time to learn. And once all these changes were made, they were able to improve how they allocated bookings into slots, and they were able to bring their off-site scans back into the organisation. So within 6 months, they got $500,000, plus they got, that was obviously repeatable, and they created capacity within their roles, and everyone was happy, because everyone was very unhappy before, and then they were happy afterwards. And it was really interesting to me to see such a simple solution, but without making it really obvious what was going on. There was no, it's got a great culture, that organisation. It's an open culture, but nobody really questioned or thought that you could change something in another department, which is effectively, as radiology had tried a lot of things, but they couldn't change them because they weren't changing the key problems within the process.
So any other questions from yourself? Anything else bouncing around in your head that you wanted to ask Diana before we just really conscious of time? So I thought I better, I could keep on going, but what's bouncing around in your head, Sue?
So was there anything out of that process that you just described that really surprised you? Was it, because it sounds quite simple in its outcome. So was there anything that surprised you, or that was hidden a little bit beneath that made that a big impact?
Well, I think it's surprising many times when you're looking at a process that the simple changes, the incremental changes, can make a big difference. Where people start is, well, have we got the right facilities? Do we need another scanning machine? Do we need another department doing something? What do we, people look to add more, but actually creating capacity from within. It didn't surprise me because I've seen it a lot, but there is hidden capacity in every organisation, and it's about channeling it and knowing what it is, fixing it, and then channeling it to the business improvement that you're trying to achieve. So in this case, they got a cost benefit, they got a revenue benefit, but they also made themselves more efficient and more effective, and therefore it becomes a more enjoyable environment and less, it wasn't a toxic environment, but less us and them and problems, and more we're working together. And what then happens is, which is surprising, it grows to, well, what else can we do? And that continuous improvement. And what Peter Mac then did was they took the tool and rolled it out across the rest of their organisation, because it became the way of doing things.
Awesome. Diana, thank you so much. Some really great insights, and I know I've got more questions. I'm pretty sure Sue has as well. But I just wanted to say, thank you very much for your time today. If people want to learn more about Bevington Partners or XCP3, where do they go? This is your opportunity to sort of share the knowledge.
Well, thanks. And I've really enjoyed being here today. It's been lots of fun. The best way, if you want to read anything about XCP3, is to go to the website, xcp3.com. We have another website as well, bevingtonpartners.com. Happy also for you to reach out and via LinkedIn to talk to me. The message I would say is, in all organisations, and with research we do through Melbourne University, there's around 40% noise or waste. What we look to do in implementing the tool set is to create capacity, and we would say that half of that is achievable, which is creating a 20% capacity. So if you'd like to talk to us, that's what we should be talking about, and feel free to reach out through LinkedIn.
Awesome. Terrific. Thank you. Sue, your takeaway, what did Diana get you thinking about today? Insights from today's discussion from your perspective.
So insights, I'm imagining everyone talks about the customer being at the center, and I'm thinking a diagram, and then you have the department out here and another one out here and another one out here, and the customer being at the center. When you were talking, I actually thought the better diagram would be, as you described, the vertical pillars of all of the organisation and the customer running through the middle, so that everyone within the organisation understood that they actually have a direct impact on that customer piece. So mine was quite visual. I probably haven't described it well, but I'm imagining next time I do a diagram with a customer at the centre, that's not how I'm going to draw it. I'm going to draw it very differently. So thank you for that.
Terrific. Awesome. Thank you, Sue. Diana, thank you very much once again. Thank you very much for being on our couch, and we look forward to our next episode. If you want to learn more about OMC Group, we are at omc-group.com.au, and love to help your people work better together as well. So Diana, Sue, thank you very much.